If you're tired of arguing with strangers on the internet, try talking with one of them in real life.
Welcome to Back in America, the podcast.
I am Stan Bertolo, and this is Back in America, a podcast exploring America's value, culture, and identity. This episode was recorded live on May 26 and includes questions from the audience. It is part of a series on positive initiatives to save our planet. In my last interviews, I spoke with Navy Reggio about the frugal economy, and then with Bruno Sarda about how corporations are experimenting with sustainability. My guest is Stefan Gallard, a French-American working for Cargo-Sailboats, a company that has built the first modern wind-powered cargo ship. Cargo-Sailboats is a wine, coffee beans, and chocolate company, and its sailboat cargo is an essential part of the company's green logistic chain. The 80-feet schooner has a payload capacity of 50 tons. It transports wine and spirit to New York and coffee and chocolate from South America to France with the lowest possible environmental impact. Welcome to Back in America, Stefan. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stan. Stefan Gallard, I am the Chief Marketing Officer for Cargo-Sailboats. And as you said, we are the proud owners of the first modern cargo sailboat that we use to transport goods from Europe to the Americas and back to Europe.
So you live in Vannes, which is in France, in Brittany, but you're an American. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I'm actually half French, half American, or full French and full American. So my father is French and my mother is American. So I was fortunate to grow up on both sides of the Atlantic. And so it was sort of a natural fit for me to end up working for a company that does transportation back and forth. So in many ways, it was kind of the ideal position for me. And yes, I do live in Brittany, and Brittany is where Cargo-Sailboats is located. And for anyone who is familiar with French geography, Brittany is kind of the western tip of France. And so we're surrounded on all sides, almost except for the inland part, but we're surrounded for 3/4 by the Atlantic Ocean, and to the north a little bit of the English Channel. So, yeah, I mean, it's we were made to do this, I guess, sailors at heart, and the big challenge was how to do it in a modern way, and more importantly, in a financially sustainable way.
And we'll come back to that. But before we dive into Cargo-Sailboats, I really want to hear more about your own personal background. You said you grew up on both sides of the Atlantic. Where did you study?
So I've got a bit of a strange background because I lived in Germany before I went to the U.S., lived in Texas for a number of years where I actually studied undergraduate at university, by a business school in Dallas, and then worked a little bit in Detroit, then in New York, actually, for a few years, and finally in North Carolina. So kind of moved around quite a bit before I decided I wanted to come back to France. I was missing France a little bit, and that was kind of
how old were you when you moved back to France?
I was
or when you moved to France?
30 years old.
30, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you actually lived in the US quite a while.
Yeah. I've lived almost half my life over there and half my life in France.
Huh. Okay. So count on me to come back to that topic later on in
Sure.
the discussion. But yeah, so actually, I mean, I'm puzzled. Which culture do you feel the closest to?
Culture is very complex, as you well know. I think that there's culture that you acquire as you grow up, and that stays with you. So I think wherever you were raised, that is sort of the foundation of your personal culture. But then culture is also influenced by where you are at the moment. And so the more time you spend somewhere, the further you will be from your original culture.
If you like this episode, please share it with your friends. And if you want to support Back in America, please leave a comment on Apple Podcast. Thank you.
I feel like I've kind of navigated and sort of shifted from one to the other, depending on how much time I spend in one country. And so what I find is that when I first go back to the US, or when I first come back to France, for example, there is definitely an adjustment period because I'm fully immersed in the prior culture. And so once I'm back into the mix, then I feel right at home, and vice versa. So I feel really comfortable in both. I'm critical of both, but I also feel enriched by both, which is great.
Am I right in saying that the Navy Yard in Brooklyn is your U.S. headquarters?
It is, but that's not where the boat is located. So the boat is that 115 Marina when we stop in New York City. So that's kind of a friendlier place to welcome visitors. But otherwise, we do have an office at the Navy Yard. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Interesting. And why did you choose New York as your main destination on your route? Why this city and why this continent, in fact?
The original goal of Grain to Sail is to get products or raw ingredients from Central America. And we're talking essentially about cocoa liqueur and green coffee beans. And so the whole point of the Grain to Sail adventure was to go get these products, these raw ingredients for which there are no substitutes locally in Europe, because we just don't have the climate to actually have these types of goods. So we have to get them from far away. There's no option. So the best way to do that is to do it with the lowest possible carbon footprint. And that's by using an endless renewable energy, which is the wind. So with that said, we are located in Brittany. So we first have to cross the Atlantic. So the big question became, well, what do we do on the way over? We know why we're building the boat. We know what we're going to bring back, but what are we doing on the way over? And that was kind of a big question mark for us. So very quickly, we analyzed the situation and said, well, we can't leave empty. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Secondly, when we started looking at possible trade, we quickly realized the limitations of that when you're talking about transporting European goods to Central and South America, where the purchasing power disparities are too big. So it was financially unfeasible for us to find any possible economically sound trade. So naturally, we started looking further up to the north. And obviously, the US is a major market. France and the US trade regularly. And why New York? Well, because there's no real good answer. It's kind of a fascinating place. It's the Big Apple. We're small, we're a very small company from a very small city in Finistère in Western France. No one's ever heard of it. It's called Morlaix. Other than French people, of course. And so it's kind of fun to say, well, here we are from this little place in France, and we're going to go and make a splash in New York City. So I think there's a bit of like the American dream in that we're trying to get for ourselves. And why wines? Well, we are Epicureans. We love good food. We love good beverages. We make chocolate. We make coffee. And so what could we transport? Something that made sense for us, that was in line with our values. And wine seemed like a natural. And it's a product, let's be honest, that's not going to suffer too much from the extra cost that our transportation method is going to generate. So if your bottle of wine in New York City costs $2 or $3 more than it would have had we sent it by cargo, so what, right? The price differential is not prohibitive in any way, especially given what we're doing. And so that's kind of, it's a long-winded answer, but you got to have a little bit of the context, because there wasn't really a full-on market analysis. There wasn't a whole strategy, except that logically we couldn't go to the south, so we went to the north. New York does the American dream because of everything that it means, because of the connection to the historic connection between the countries. And why wine? Well, because what else would we bring from France anyways, right? so yeah, I mean, it's kind of a fun product. Yeah, so.
I just want to pause to say hi to our audience. We've got a message from Cannes. So welcome to this live, and make sure you participate. Ask your question to Stefan. So you mentioned that indeed you are a wine, a chocolate, coffee company. Something very unique about yourself, beside the fact, which is already quite unique, that you transport your good by sailboat, is that you own your mean of transportation, right? Now, if we just look at the business model, does it make sense to own a sailboat to transport it? I mean, what is the purpose of the company? Was it a nice excuse to build a very cool sailboat and sail across the ocean? Or was it more, money funded?
So we're definitely not an NGO. By the virtue of that, that means that we have to ensure the financial stability and sustainability of the company. If the company can't sustain itself financially, all this means nothing, right? I mean, nowadays we employ a little over 50 people. So we have to be able to maintain these jobs, continue to grow the company, right? So there's a real economic imperative when you're in business. You can't just do this in any which way. The original goal is really to do wind transportation or wind propelled transportation. That's really the original goal. There are two ways to finance a ship. One is to go get potential customers who are going to basically reserve a spot in your boat. And once you have enough of those contracts, you can go see financial institutions to finance your boat. That means, however, that you are competitive in terms of the rates that you are going to charge for the transportation. And the only way to do that is by having a very large boat. So the larger the boat, the cheaper it is per kilo, per pound to transport. The other option, which is the one that Grain to Sail followed, was we have to build first a business, an operating business, that once it generates sufficient revenue, we will be able to use that to finance the boat. And what's interesting is we will be able to finance a smaller boat more quickly. We don't have to, it's not a race to have a very large boat because we're disconnected from the market reality because we work for ourselves. We're completely vertically integrated. So the advantage of that is kind of what I just described. The disadvantage of that is that it meant that we were building a business on a promise. So in essence, buy our chocolates, buy our coffees, and one day we will have a boat. So we were hoping that people would buy into the promise and be willing to, in essence, finance the future boat. And so that took a few years, as you can imagine. We started roasting coffees in 2013. And then making chocolates in 2016. And it was in 2018 when we were able to sign the contract to launch the construction of the boat. And it took 2 years to build. So sequentially, this, no matter how you look at it, is going to take time. The reason why I think we've been successful is because there are other projects to have very large boats for the financial realities that I just described. But they take a lot of time. When you're talking about boats that are 130, 140, 150 meters long, you can imagine the investment that represents. For our boat, it's basically an 80-foot schooner type. So an 80-foot vessel, that cost about 2 million euros for us to build. So you can multiply that, times the size of the boat. So when you're talking about 20, 30 million euros to raise, that's going to take time, no matter how you look at it. And so we were able to do it because we first built the business that was able to then finance the boat. So we actually started with the objective of having our boat, but we had to work kind of reverse engineer, which was difficult, but it worked out.
Why wanting to build that boat? What was the motivation behind it?
Over 90% of the world of the world exchanges are done by maritime transportation. So stuff that's transported on the large cargoes in the container ships that we see, right? Over 90%. There's obviously a huge gap there between what's currently being done and what could be done in terms of energy efficiency and carbon footprint. It's difficult because these boats are optimized. They're kind of economic war machines, right? I mean, the cost of transportation is very, very low. That's why we're able to transport all this stuff all around the world. That was kind of the first realization, is that so much of the international exchange is being done with these traditional cargoes, and there's got to be a better way. What can we do? Secondly, it's sort of also questioning, does it make sense to transport everything back and forth? And what we're seeing in France, especially in Europe in general, and to an extent, I think is happening in the US as well, consumers started buying into organic foods, okay, which are foods that have the advantage of using basically no pesticides or very low quantities of pesticides, which is better for our health and better for the environment, of course. Then we started seeing a lot of movement around local foods, so locally produced. The best thing is if it's local and organic, right? Now there's a new phase, which is buying in bulk. So you no longer have packaging as a way to reduce your footprint. And so when you kind of go down the line, the next step is, okay, if I can't get something that is local, how do I get it to, right? If there's no solution, if there's no alternative, and typically coffees and chocolates, we'll never be able to have them locally produced. So what is the alternative? What can you do to improve and to have a more responsible consumption? Well, you have to question, how is it getting to me? And the how is it getting to me? That was the big question mark for us. And the answer was, if we have to improve the way we transport, how do we do that? And the sailboat is ultimately the most efficient, the most effective, and the lowest possible carbon footprint type of transportation. So that was kind of how we ended up there. And yeah, that really was the idea. And so what do we transport? Well, like I said, coffee and chocolate. And if you flip it on the other side, French wines. It's impossible to get French wines in the US without transporting them. You can get American wines, but you can't get wines from France, right? There's no alternative. And so that's where you start questioning, okay, well, we're only going to transport things that you can't get locally and that you can ultimately kind of incorporate the extra cost. So, for example, the chocolate bars in France that we sell, the extra cost of the transportation is about 10 cents per tablet, which is not a whole lot, right? Like I said, for the wines, it's about $2 or $3 per bottle, which is also not a whole lot. So it's got to be done in a way that the consumer is capable of sort of digesting that, because the story and the value proposition is sufficiently strong. So that's kind of how we did that.
Okay. So I've got two questions. First of all, I mean, obviously the boat itself has a carbon footprint.
Correct.
Right? Building it, I believe it's in aluminium. Yes. Or something. It has a carbon footprint. Did you come up with sort of kind of an idea of how many trips it will take before that is counterbalanced by a more traditional cargo shipping?
I haven't looked at, so we haven't looked at that specifically. What we compared was cargo versus conventional cargo shipping versus our cargo shipping. That's really the metric, because the boats are built and destroyed and built regularly, right? Unfortunately, you could say. So by building our boat, sure, we're making a carbon footprint that's undeniable. But we also have the advantage of being able to use it much longer, because we're not subject to the economic pressures of the regular cargos. And secondly, we manufactured it in aluminum, which is a highly recyclable material. So that was also the objective. So this is a boat that is projected to be in operation at least 20 to 30 years minimum, and if we take care of it, possibly more. So that's really the goal. So the carbon footprint over the lifetime is relatively low, and we're able to do 2 round trips per year. By round trip, I mean France to New York to Central America back to France. So we're able to do that twice a year. So if you look at the number of times we're on, or not the number of times, but the amount of time we're in operation, I think it's a pretty effective tool.
Okay, we've got a question. I don't know if you saw that on the comment.
Not.
How many crew do you have on your ship?
So we have 4. So this boat is designed for 4 crew members. So basically teams of 2 that will operate in shifts. So we have the captain, second, lieutenant, and a sailor. And we have a gender mixity. So we have a female crew member on board. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a...
That's not a lot. I mean, for a big boat like that, it's not a lot of crew, right?
No.
Talk to me about the crew and the IT you've got on board. And
sure.
And all that.
Yeah. So one thing that's important to keep in mind is our boat is registered or certified for international maritime transportation. So we are subject to the same norms as a 200-meter cargo sailboat or cargo boat. Sorry, cargo ship. So the rules of the game are exactly the same because we are a merchant vessel, a marine merchant vessel. So that means that our crew are also officers of the Marine, right? Of marine merchant officers. So the challenge for us was in finding those sailors or those officers who are also sailors. That's the challenge. So those who are used to navigating internationally, transporting goods, all of the administrative issues that go along with it, but that could also handle a winch, right? That can handle the sails. And unfortunately, as of today, there's no formal training for that. So there are schools to learn how to sail. There are schools to learn how to become a marine merchant officer. But the two is sort of a hybrid. And today, there's no real training for that. So finding the right type of crew members was in and of itself already a bit of a challenge. So we were fortunate, very fortunate, to find some great sailors who had the appropriate background. And on board, that means that because we're subject to all of these international shipping standards, we have the latest technology for example, closed circuit TV on board, all of the electronic system for navigation. We have incorporated a bunch of renewable energies on board to provide the electricity. So for instance, we have different solar power packs. We have 2 wind generators and 2 hydro generators as well. That means we're completely autonomous for energy on board. So we do have a small engine, a small motor. It's a 110 horsepower motor, which is a legal requirement to maneuver in the ports. So when you're arriving in ports and maneuvering, you have to have a small engine. But yeah, it's we call it retro innovation in the sense that we're using tried and proven technologies in terms of sailing, but we're doing it in a modern way. And so that's where we're able to incorporate modern materials such as aluminum, carbon fiber for the masts. That's where we're able to incorporate all of the electronic components on board. We have a bunch of safety features on board, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where we're doing that in a modern way, but certainly we're no more, no less using wind the same way, 2, 3, 4, 500 years ago.
Right.
That's just the same principle.
How long take a round trip?
So
from France, Central America, back
so
to France?
I'll kind of dissect the whole mission. So we leave from France and go to New York City. We've done that twice now, and it was 27 and 28 days. So more or less, we'll say between 25 and 30 days, depending on the winds. Then we go from New York. Currently, we're going to the Dominican Republic. That could change later on, depending on where we're getting our raw ingredients. But currently, we're going to the Dominican Republic. So from New York to the Dominican Republic is about 12 days, 12 to 15 days. And then we cross back from the Dominican Republic to France, and that's also between 25 and 30 days. So with stoppage, any type of maintenance that needs to be done, for example, in New York City, we stay a little bit longer because we have media and visitors that want to see the boat. So all in all, we count about 3 months for the entire round trip. France to New York to Dominican Republic, back to France. It's about 3 months.
Stefan Gallard, I would really want you to talk to me about the impact your company has had in general. And I'm thinking social impact in terms of raising awareness, impact in terms of innovation. I get the feeling that your business is indeed, it has to be sustainable, it has to be a business, but you're trying to make a point, right? You're trying to do something more. Speak to me about that.
We're guided by very strong values. All of this, right? It's kind of a crazy project when you really think about it. So as much as I discussed the financial sustainability component, which is essential for a company to keep going, we're definitely guided by some strong values. Otherwise, we wouldn't go into all of this. We try to challenge some of the status quo, some of the preconceived notions that, it is actually possible for a business to reinvent itself in a much more sustainable way, and not only environmentally, but also financially. So in other words, it's possible to be environmentally conscious, environmentally sustainable, and still make money, right? I mean, those things are not contradictory notions. Furthermore, there's the social impact of what we're doing. So for instance, in France, we work with a Handicap Workers Association. So we have about 15 handicap workers from some physical handicaps to mental illnesses that work with us. And that's important from a social standpoint for us, to show that it's not just about the environment. It's also about social improvement, showing that all types of people can benefit. It's also why, for instance, the reason why I talk about the financial component is because we have an approach and a desire to have prices that are affordable for the greatest amount of people. So, for instance, our chocolate bars in France are sold for, and they're 100-gram chocolate bars. They're sold for between 2.50 and €3, which is a little bit more than some of the big companies we know, but it's not massively more, to the point that it's not still accessible to the greatest amount of people. And that's also socially responsible. Social responsibility also means ensuring proper living wages and working conditions for our farmers, our smallholders who are working the cocoa and the coffee in the plantations. Right? So it's kind of a whole, and it's definitely possible. It doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean we're perfect, but it's definitely possible to consider all of these issues and to try to address them. And so we still have a way to go. So we have, definite objectives that we set for ourselves. We also recognize that we are a small team and we can't do it all simultaneously. And that's sometimes frustrating for us. But we're at least conscious, and I think we're asking ourselves the right questions. And by virtue of asking yourself the right questions, you sort of land on the right answers, or at least, better answers. And when you're not restricting yourself to sort of status quo, to preconceived ideas, you realize that there are a lot of different alternatives. There are other solutions. So, yeah, I mean, definitely, it's a whole, and everyone in the company is fully committed to that. And I think that if you want to go even further, sorry to interrupt, but I think a lot of us are with Grain to Sail because we believe in it. And so I was saying, for me, I could make more money working somewhere else, but there's a sense of purpose, right? And that's worth a lot. When I work, I know what I'm doing. I'm trying to make a contribution. And I think there are not a whole lot of companies that truly embody that. As long as you don't fall into some greenwashing, as long as it is legitimate, as long as it is consistent and substantial, there is a way to do this, and we're showing that it's possible.
And let me ask you, what do you think people usually don't understand about Grain to Sail?
First of all, the complexity, right? Because we have our own production unit to make chocolates, to roast coffee. So we're a food company, right? We also distribute. So we're also a distribution company. We designed and built, not physically, but with partners, but oversaw the building of the ship. We operate the ship. In our employees, we have, as I mentioned, handicapped workers, administrative folks, salespeople, the sailors, right? I mean, so all of that for a relatively small company. You would think the company would be huge in order to be able to do all that. And I think a lot of people misunderstand the actual size of the company. We're really small, about 50 people. And yet we're able to do all of this and bring everything under one roof. So I think that's really unique. And I think the other part that sometimes people don't get is that we are also quite pragmatic and realistic. And what that means is that we accept that there are things we have to do sequentially. And so sometimes people want us to do more, to be even more militant, to go further, and to do it all at once. And what we have to accept is that you have to balance all of these different priorities. The social responsibility, the environmental responsibility, and the financial responsibility, because the financial responsibility ensures employment for all of these people and their families. So you're constantly, it's all about trade-offs, and that's the challenge. It's finding that balance, which obviously balance itself is very hard to find, and once you have it, it's hard to maintain. So it's always kind of arbitrage. It's always decisions, and sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't, and sometimes you have to correct, and sometimes you have to accept that this is the best decision we can make right now, but we're going towards that. And as soon as we possibly can, we will make an even better decision.
And do you think you have already been inspiring other industries? Do you have an example of industry that could benefit from this retro innovation model?
We're just scratching the surface for sure. We are part of an association called Windship in France, which is part of the International Windship Association, the IWSA. And so we're part of an ecosystem that's really just developing itself. It's just being born. So we're not the only ones, and that's a good thing. And here's why. If we were, we would be an anomaly. And if we're an anomaly, that means it's not repeatable, and that means our impact is very limited. The moment that you show that you're part of an overall ecosystem, the moment you show there are other people doing the same thing, maybe not exactly the same way, but they have the same vision, and that they're able to actually make it a reality, then you're making real progress, right? That's the whole objective. And so at that point, you're able to gather people around you, from politicians, because you ultimately need political will in order to make this a reality. Consumers, right? The moment consumers start asking about this, then it applies pressure and it creates demand. And if you know anything about economics, if there's demand, at some point there'll be supply, right? Entrepreneurs and investors will find a way to meet that demand. So if we were truly the only ones doing this, it wouldn't make sense. Now, we're happy to have been the first ones, but we're definitely not the only ones. And there are some really interesting projects around wind propulsion or hybrid propulsion. So that's what's great. And then when you think about that, for instance, we are going from France to the Americas, but there are a lot of other possible destinations. So yeah, I mean, that's what's really encouraging, and even we are starting to think about what's next. So that's truly encouraging, and that inspires us actually when we see others doing other things as well.
Question from the audience here.
Yeah, it's actually a great question. So I'll read it out. So if a round trip takes 3 months and we're planning 2 round trips per year, so you were listening correctly, what does the ship do during the remaining 6 months of the year in France other than maintenance? And so the question is it chartered out, for instance? 3 months times 2, kind of more or less the navigation time. When we get back to France, we'll take, at least a week or 2, possibly more, for maintenance. So if you put it all together, you're looking at 7 to 8 months when the boat is pretty much being used for the round trips, for the cross-Atlantic crossings, right? So that leaves about 4 to 5 months truly out of the year where we can do something else with the boat. So when we started all this, it was sufficiently complex just doing all that, that we didn't really think so much, at least not in detail, about what could be done during those few months. So we're going to actually do 2 things. One, and we're planning this for this summer, we're actually going to go visit different harbors in France, different port cities, to kind of spread the word, to tell people, hey, look at the Grain to Sail sailboat, cargo sailboat. Look at what it is. Look at what we're doing, to try to inspire people and kind of share our story. So it's going to be a bit of a kind of a showcase tour for us, and that's going to last from probably about end of July till end of September, more or less. What we're actually thinking about, and this will be for next year, is other things we can do. So where else could we go, perhaps not as far, and how could we use the boat to go get perhaps some other ingredients that we need as well? So could we go down to Spain, to Portugal, maybe even a little bit of the northern western part of Africa? Are there some things we could do? Go into the Mediterranean. Go into the Mediterranean is tricky because we are a sailboat, and so wind conditions are notoriously difficult in the Mediterranean, and so there are 2 kind of consequences of this. One would be we would have to probably use the motor, which unfortunately our motor is so small and we have very little fuel on board, so we can't actually travel very far with the engine. And the second risk is that if we have to really rely on wind conditions, if the wind conditions are difficult, or if there is no wind, which can definitely happen, then we could be stuck for a long time in the Mediterranean, which doesn't help us because our main objective is to cross the Atlantic.
We're getting at the end of this interview, and being in a podcast about culture, values, and identity of the US, I would love you to comment on the following. When you come to the US, what is your perception of the American when it comes to climate change? And when it comes to just what you do, right? Using a sailboat to transport goods.
So I'll say 2 answers. One is my personal opinion, and the other is more factual, based on the experience that we've had and how we've been welcomed in New York. So my first, which is my opinion, my first answer is that I often say the U.S. is the land of the extremes. The wildest, kind of the most extreme opinions coexist, and that's totally perfectly acceptable. And that's kind of what's great. That's the American plurality. So we accept all types of opinions and ideas, and they're part of sort of the general conversation. And I tend to say that the extremes at one point, one extreme will win over the other, but it sort of moves the masses from one place to another. And so that means that you have everything and its opposite, which can be a bit frustrating. And there's a bit of a lag sometimes because there are people who are really at the forefront of things, and there are people who are really conservative and are going to resist any type of change. And so, by the time one sort of wins, it can take a while. And so specifically related to sustainability and sort of environmental awareness, you have both extremes in the US. You have people who are really like so far ahead, even ahead of what's happening in Europe sometimes. But they're small, right? They're the extremes, and you have the rest. And so right now there's sort of and we've seen it very well politically with former President Trump and current President Biden. We see kind of those two extremes almost embodied symbolically by the two presidents. One who's trying to pass a Green New Deal, and the other one who is really against it. So it's hard to say where this is going to land, but certainly what we're seeing is that there's an appetite, and there are a lot of people who are asking themselves, like, how can I consume better? How can I be more responsible? And I think Americans are becoming more sensitive to that. And there's a lot of evidence about this that we can actually see. Now, factually, what I can say is when we arrive in New York City and we present our wines, now we're talking to, admittedly, a relatively small portion of the population and a small portion of New Yorkers. It's those who are interested in organic and environmental issues, those who are interested in wines, and those who are interested in sailing. So it's not everybody, granted, but we have been welcomed with arms wide open. People are really fascinated by what we're doing. They're really buying into it, and they're saying, this is so cool, right? Finally, we've got something. When I drink my bottle of wine, I can do it guilt-free, right? And I can really be happy about not only the beverage that I'm drinking, but about the story I can tell when I pop open my bottle of wine. And so what we can only hope for is that this kind of niche market that we're addressing currently can become more massive over time. And we've been able to generate some exposure, some media interest, some kind of ground roots level as well with people, and hopefully that kind of builds momentum. And that's, I think we're just part of the broader conversation. But we're showcasing, along with others, that, hey, when it comes to transportation, we don't have to simply accept the status quo. There are other things, even though it might be small, it might be just at the beginning, but everything has a start. And so we're part of that.
So to drink your wine or eat your chocolate, you need to live in New York at the moment,
Correct.
right? I think you have only 2 distribution for the wine.
Yep.
One in Brooklyn, one in Manhattan.
there'll be more, especially now that the restaurants and wine bars have reopened. But you have to live in New York City. If you go on our website, we've got some information about that. But unfortunately, if you're not in New York City, it's going to be hard to get grain to sell wines.
Okay, all right. Before we stop, is there anything else you want to add before I ask you the traditional last question?
I personally, humbly, am very pleased to work for this company. It's been a great adventure. I've been working with them for 3 years now, and the ability to, at my little level, have a tangible contribution is really empowering. And so that's what feeds me. And I can only hope that other people can see what I'm trying to do, and that they can find that sense of purpose in their own careers.
Right. And I want to say again that Stefan Gallard, you're the Chief Marketing Officer of Cargo-Sailboats. Stefan, what is America to you?
It's a land of contradictions. It's a land of opportunity. It's a land of possibilities. But with all that represents, the good and the bad. It's a chaotic country that can yield the very best, and unfortunately sometimes can yield the very worst. And I think that if I could compare it to France, the 2 countries that I know very well, things may not move as quickly in France, but they're definitely less chaotic. It's a little bit more stable, but that also creates inertia. And so that's why I love going back and forth between the two, because I feed on that energy that the U.S. has. And I also appreciate kind of the stability that France represents. I don't know that I would be happy living forever in one or the other, and I'm very glad to have both passports.
Stefan Gallard, thank you so much for your time today. Congratulations on this amazing business you've got, this cargo sailing boat. When will be the next trip?
Well, the boat is leaving today from New York City. So we're actually in New York currently. They're leaving today to go to the Dominican Republic. So they'll be back in France in July at some point. And so far, so good, right? We were very happy to see it leave the first time. We were even happier to see it come back in one piece. And now it's sort of a routine trip for us almost, right? So that's the greatest thing we can imagine for us. So then it's just, we'll be announcing the future trips. I will only finish by saying that we're actually designing a second boat right now, which will be a much bigger boat, about 50 meters and 300 tons of payload capacity. So that's the next big thing for us. And we're definitely very excited to see anyone and all in any of the harbors we're visiting, and certainly go on a website to see where we'll be next, and we'll be happy to have you on board.
Stefan, thank you so much. And as we say in France, bon vent.
Thank you very much.